Dave, let me ask you a question. If people would ask you what your title is,
Right.
how would you describe what you do?
My appointment at Stanford is as a lecturer. I'm a lecturer in the design program in the mechanical engineering department in the School of Engineering at the University of Stanford. So that's the layering. There are like 7 or 9 different rankings you could have academically that would allow you to legitimately teach at Stanford.
Yeah.
Lecturer is second from the bottom. So I'm in the pond scum part of the ecosystem.
For those who may not know about your journey, talk a little bit about your journey, how you are right where you are right now in Stanford. How did you get to where you are right now? You worked at Apple, you worked at different places.
Well, and again, so my appointment is as a lecturer. My job is as the co-founder of the Stanford Life Design Lab, which is a project of the design program. How do we apply design thinking to designing your life? Which is, and nobody had that job before because we invented it. So how did I get here? Well, I got here mostly by being really bad at doing the stuff I now teach. Like many people, my life is really organized around sort of walking out my wounds. We're all wounded, walking wounded, and trying to figure out how to solve your deep agonies is a big part of a lot of people's life. And for me, I really hit my late teens, early 20s, in and right after college, really not knowing what I wanted to do with my life. And I found the help I got from people, whether it was my parents or whether it was the university or whether it was the church, to be singularly unhelpful. Everybody started asking, well, what's the answer? What do you want to do, young man? What have you heard God tell you? What's the most important thing? And I don't know the answer to any of these questions. And nobody's talking about how to find them. They're just talking about, well, once you know, you'll let me know and we'll help you go do that.
Yeah.
I go, I don't need help doing things. I need help figuring things out. So that going back to when I was 19, that's how this started. And so it was very difficult in the early going because I was quite convinced that Christianity had a lot to say about this. And for some reason, all the grown-ups are holding out on me. I'm sure that if human life matters and the world matters, which Christianity deeply believes, then the largest expression of human life called work, it's the biggest thing all of us do, must matter. Must matter spiritually, must matter humanly, must matter socially. And so how we go about allocating that incredibly precious resource called your life, of which there's a limited amount and I'm in charge of. If God's given us freedom and autonomy, boy, that's a really big responsibility.
Yeah.
I'm sure the faith has to have something to say about how to do that. Yeah. Well, the faith has a ton to say about how to do that. Just they weren't giving that information out at the time. And so then I ended up in high tech. That's a long story, but so I tried to be in the energy business before there was an advanced energy business. I wanted to do wind and solar and conservation and hybrid engines, all of which we knew how to do, by the way, in 1976. We just didn't have the social will to do it. So after 4 years of failing miserably at that, I gave up. I fell into high tech. I was at Apple in the early days. Then I flipped out of there with my boss to co-found a thing called Electronic Arts. And then from there I went into telecom. From there I went into management consulting. I was really having a good time with startups, but I was spending too much time at them. I thought maybe I could be more helpful by working with lots of companies, not just one, and I could control my time a little more easily if I was a contractor than an employee, much less a founder, and see my kids awake, which wasn't happening very well. And so then I ended up in 1990 at the age of 38 becoming a freelance management consultant. So then I was a gainfully unemployed marketing guy for the next 25 years.
Yeah.
But I still, along the way, just on the side, kept addressing the question, how do we figure this out? So I was teaching classes in churches and then in colleges and having countless cups of coffee before work or a beer or a glass of wine after with sitting down with Tommy and go, so Tommy, so how's it going? I've had that conversation probably 10 or 20,000 times, literally, over the last 45 years. And then I got invited to teach a class on those questions at Berkeley, and then suddenly this whole education thing opened up.
Got it. And you spent some time in Apple too, right?
Yep.
For a number of years. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what were you doing at Apple during that period of time?
After the failed attempt at the energy business that didn't exist, then I thought, well, what's the next thing I could do with my mechanical engineering degree? I had an interest in biomedical devices.
Got it.
So let's, if we can't save, the energy crisis, we could save people's lives. Yep. So let's go do that. So I was just about to land a job as a product manager for the first self-cauterizing scalpel with a high-tech biomed company that actually, they're very common now. This is back in the 80s. As you cut through the person, this thing actually heats up and cauterizes the blood vessels as you go.
Yeah,
so rather than have 35 clamps hanging out of your abdomen during the thing, we just cut right through. So I was about to go do that, and I got a phone call. I got a phone call from Apple Computer. And they said, well, we would like to talk to you. And I said, no, actually, you don't. You want to talk to the Dave Evans at Hewlett-Packard. He's a computer guy. I'm not. And I hung up the phone.
Yeah.
Because my name is David John Evans, the fourth. My son is the fifth. His son is the sixth. Dave Evans is a very common white guy name. About 2 weeks after AOL was created 1,000 years ago, I signed up. I was already the 4,000th Dave Evans.
Yeah. Wow. Uh-huh.
So you can get them in 6-packs at Costco.
Yeah.
And so I was pretty sure that I was getting the wrong guy's phone call. I knew there was a Dave Evans at Hewlett-Packard. He's a computer guy. I'm a mechanical engineer. I don't even care about computers. They bore me. They just lie there. I do things that spin 180,000 RPM or fly or go to the moon. That's what mechanical engineers do. That's really cool. Computers just lie there. They're so boring. And they kept calling back. And I go, no, you don't want to talk to me. You don't want to talk to the other guy. They go, no, we want to talk to you. I said, there's no way you want to talk to me. And they said, I've got your resume right here. Well, read it to me. I'm sure it's wrong. And it was my resume.
Yeah.
And I got mad. I go, who gave you my resume? I don't want to talk to you people. And they wouldn't let me alone. So I finally said, look, okay, I'll come over for lunch. Buy me lunch. Give me a tour. It'll probably be interesting. Steve Jobs had just been on the cover of Time magazine. And I said, very quickly you'll realize I'm the wrong guy. And 14 interviews later, to my great astonishment, they gave me an offer. And to my greater astonishment, I took it. Yeah. And that's the beginning of my high-tech career.
Wow, yeah. Now, how long did you stay at Apple for?
About 2.5 years.
Okay. And what was your role at Apple?
I was... my title was Peripherals Product Manager. I was the third guy on the marketing group for the Lisa team.
Yeah.
So like the recent Steve Jobs movie, it starts in the era that I was there.
Okay.
I worked with most of those people.
Yeah.
So Lisa, which is the predecessor to Macintosh, was the first graphic user interface-based computer and using a mouse as a pointing device.
Got it.
So as the peripherals product manager, they said, well, you've got an ME degree. You get stuff that has parts, not just code.
Yeah.
We'll make you in charge of all the things that have parts that move.
Okay.
So as a moving part, you're in charge. So I had the mouse, keyboards, disk drives, and printers, and spent almost all my time on the mouse and printers.
Really? Okay.
So I got to oversee the commercialization of the first mouse and the distribution of the first desktop laser printing and desktop publishing.
Wow.
Okay. Which is, so fonts, the invention of fonts.
Yeah.
And cool stuff, really cool stuff.
If someone says to you, okay, Dave, as a Christian, you now had a hand in creating the mouse, keyboard, whatever it is, how does your Christian perspective, your Christian life, how does that influence as you design different things?
It was my Christian perspective that drove me to take a job I didn't want to take.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting here, I'm literally getting what I'm sure is a wrong number phone call.
Okay. Yeah.
From Apple. I hang up on them.
Yeah.
But I do not recommend this behavior right now. And then they keep bugging me. And they do it, by the way, in the first luncheon, they go, oh, you really don't know anything about what we do. And you have no orientation to this industry at all. I go, right, exactly. Yeah. So I'm going to go now. They go, no, let's keep talking.
Yeah.
At the end of this conversation, including talking with Steve Jobs, they go, look, literally they said, you don't know squat about what we do here, but we think you're an Apple kind of guy. You get it. So we just want to give it a try.
Yeah.
My first title was Special Projects.
Yeah.
Give him something to do that he won't screw up, and let's see if it works. Literally, that was the job.
Yeah.
And before I took the job, I thought, I don't, then or now, I don't actually love computing. I don't like the products per se at all. They're just things.
Yeah.
But here's what flipped it for me. I had failed trying to fulfill the mission of solving the energy crisis. Get off the fossil fuel problem.
Got it.
The world wasn't ready to solve that problem.
Yeah.
I had no interest in computing per se, but here's what these guys were doing. They were going to put all this power, this CPU power, they're going to dedicate a bunch of computing capacity to this interface.
Yeah.
They're going to make a friendly computer. So that philosophically, what Apple was doing was saying, we're going to decide that the computer should serve the person, not the person should serve the computer. You should learn job control language. You should learn how to do algol. You should learn how to, let's let the computer do computing, and we'll have all the computing power go into computing.
Yeah.
It'll be faster. It'll be more mathematical. It'll be more intelligent. It's still impossible to deal with. It's totally arcane, but that's your problem. You're the human. You go get good at being a computer. As opposed to, no, the computer is going to get good at being a person.
Yeah.
And I said, I like the trajectory of that. I want technology to serve us, not us to serve technology.
Got it.
This is a huge philosophic decision. No computer company on the face of the earth at that time would have wasted all that computing power on just looking cute.
Yeah.
You'd put it into more important things like processing and math.
Correct.
And so this was a fundamentally different value system. And I said, I not only want to see how a company would try to commercialize that way of thinking, I want these guys to win the war.
Got it, yeah.
Computing is a big deal. It's going to have a huge effect on society. It's not my interest technologically, but it has a huge impact. So there was this really important thing called energy. And I wanted to get on the bus of doing it in a more righteous, justice-oriented way. And that wasn't happening. But a more righteous, justice-oriented, more human way of doing computing was about to happen, and somebody walked up out of nowhere and basically kissed me straight on the lips and said, do you want to come?
Yep.
And I said, well, that's a social change I could be a part of. I think that's an appropriate use of technology, and spiritually, that's a validatable mission. So I'm going to drop the mission of solve the energy crisis, and I'm going to pick up the mission of computing for the rest of us.
Got it.
Human-centered computing for the rest of us. Maybe I'll be a part of that. So it was entirely faith mission driven.
Got it. And then after a couple of years, you left. And here's the bigger question. And we're going to talk about design thinking a little bit. How do you know when it's time to leave? Yeah, I think that was just.
How do you know when you know? Yeah.
Yes, and you've been.
It was very difficult. It was very difficult. Now, again, changes like that sometimes occur inside out, like it's time.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're outside in. Here comes something you didn't have in mind. So Apple started outside. I did not have that in mind. But once it arrived, I had to discern what's God saying in this moment, and how do I respond to it. Now I could have stayed with the biomedical thing. That would have been fine.
Yeah.
It wasn't like clearly there was an angel hovering over the Apple building and shining light on it. It didn't have that kind of clarity. But when I allowed myself to reframe what it might mean to me, did that change my position? And it did. Then to leave, so things went really well for me. I'm having a great time. We're doing really good work. My last title was Director of New Product Development. So I was in charge of new product development for one whole division, not the entire company, at a place called Apple. That's a really cool job.
Yeah.
And then the guy that first hired me, Trip Hawkins, had quit to go start what became Electronic Arts. And he had walked into Mike Markle, the then CEO of the company's office, to quit.
Yeah.
Because he said, look, Mike, I'm going to go start my company finally. And he's walking back to his office, and he stops at my cubicle. And he says, Dave, you got a minute? And I go, sure, sit down. And he goes, no, we need a conference room. I went, ooh, there's always trouble. We need a conference room. It's a private conversation. I said, what's up? And he goes, well, I just quit, and here's what we're going to do. And he lays out the plan for the company. And I was offended. Because it wasn't. He says, "Here's what I've decided you're going to do." Is what he's really meant, And I said, I'd really appreciate if you put that in the form of a question, not a statement. Like I'd like a little autonomy here, We're both 29 and insufferable, And so we actually got in a big fight, and almost broke up the act right there. Or in the subsequent weeks. But nonetheless, long story short, in a way very similar to, going to Electronic Arts was just as unnatural an act for me as going to Apple at the time.
Yeah.
And I did it because, again, software, and by the way, it wasn't just a gaming company when we conceived it. It was a broad personal software supplier fulfilling the missional statement of creating software worthy of the minds that use it, and elevating the status of a software developer to that of an art form.
Yeah.
Making software artists, not software engineers.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
And the Trip deeply believed that the interactivity of digital media and the capacity for sound and visual mediated experiences that computers could do was a brave new world, and that we were not that far from when the interactive software, what we would now call gaming industry, would dwarf the movie business. Now, this is 1984 or something, 82. Now, if you said that out loud, people would just have you committed. Like, what? There is no personal software industry. It doesn't even exist.
Yeah.
And you're saying it's going to be bigger than the movies. And it now is, far and away.
Yeah.
So that was a very visionary statement. In fact, the first ad the company ran was we see farther. We see a future you can't see. If you want to go there, join us. So it was incredibly arrogant. But that sort of mission-mindedness I thought was really interesting. And the first thing we did was write the company manifesto, not the company business plan. So we wanted to create a place where that kind of creativity could occur, that fully, enabled human beings to be their best selves. And so the idea of, wow, this is actually like watching the creation of a creative corporate culture from scratch. I could actually be a part of creating a workplace with those values and those mindsets. And the fact that the product wasn't, the product wasn't of great interest to me, but everything else around it was. And those attributes, the people I was going to work with, the mission we were on, the nature of the world in which we were going into, those were really interesting and really, really stimulating and creative. And I thought noble, and I thought, boy, those attributes are incredibly hard to come by. They're harder to come by than working on what you think is cool, like a biomedical thing or an advanced car engine. That's cool. But wonderful is hard to come by. So I had a bunch of wonderful with a less than cool product for me. I don't play games then or now. I was the vice president of talent, which didn't mean HR in back of those days. I mean, the talent that does the creativity. So I ran the producer group that created all the products. I was in charge of product development for a creative gaming company, and I don't play games, ever. Now, my water polo coach in high school couldn't swim. So I had been trained that you can be good. You can be good at facilitating something that you don't necessarily do.
Correct.
But for that same reason, I only did that for 2.5 years.
Dave, let's talk a little bit about designing your life. Talk a little bit about that. What is that? How did it come to be from a book to a concept? If you were to describe it to an audience or listeners here, what is that?
Well, okay, so first of all, how we got there and what is it? Let's start with how we got there. How we got there was, as you've already learned, I had a really hard time. I still find it a real struggle to figure out how to spend my life. And I was particularly within the Christian faith, was convinced that there was help there that was harder to come by than it deserved to be. So indeed, Christianity has a deep and rich tradition in discernment and vocational, call discovery and call how do we live the discerning life. We know a lot about that. We just teach it rather poorly, and we fell for the sacred secular gap, thinking that real spiritual stuff is over in church and secular stuff is in the business world, and that's completely false. So I had two things working against me. We'd sort of lost our understanding of the tradition of discernment, and we didn't apply it to the secular world. So you had to overcome those two falsehoods. So once I got that done and realized there's one reality called the world. Not the secular. There's not a God world and a secular world. There's the world. It's all God's world all the time. Not everybody in it acknowledges God, but that's just their misunderstanding. So if we're in the world doing God's work, how do you find that? So start figuring that stuff out. And then I have the career we just described. But because it was terribly important to me, I noticed it's terribly important to everybody. This question of what do I do with Tommy? And what do I do with Han? This is hard. Most people find their lives interesting to them, and they would like to spend them well. So on the side, I'm talking to people before and after work. I'm teaching a class in church, and people show up and kind of go, I really need to know this. So I'm having this conversation. And also as a manager, I'm running companies, and everybody who works for me and works with me, they're care about their lives too. So I'm in the conversation on the side of my career about how to help people figure their lives out for years and years and years and years and years and years and years. Then and I've always done youth work. I coached Little League and taught Sunday school, and I was a YMCA counselor. And I guess I liked being 18 to 32 because I keep hanging out with those people even 40 years later. And I had been away from that for a while because career got so busy and kids were small, and I missed youth work, young adult work. And I thought, what's going on there? So I went back to talk to a bunch of people who are still doing that kind of work, and somebody invited me to teach a class once at Cal Berkeley, which I did. And that turned into being a teacher, then that turned into Stanford, and then Stanford turned into the lab, and the lab turned into the book, and the book turned into talking to you.
How would you describe it? For those who may not understand the concept of the book, give us a preview of that, give us an understanding.
Well, the mission of the Life Design Lab at Stanford is to apply the innovation principles of design thinking to the wicked problem of designing your life during or after college. Now that's a technical answer. And so, what does innovation mean? What are the principles of design thinking? What is design thinking? What does it mean to design your life? If you double click on any of those little power-packed phrases, you can get a whole long white paper.
Yeah.
But what it really means is, so design thinking is an innovation process that you could apply to a wicked problem, is a difficult one about which we know we don't have enough information, and the only way to get there is to sort of try to build the future before it exists.
Got it.
The empirical process of making it up as you go along. So design thinking is a very, very effective methodology to make it up as you go along really well.
Yeah.
And develop products that are innovative, creative, that human beings can invent, and particularly that human beings can use. So human-centered design is the technical name of what became marketed as design thinking. It's been around since the 60s. It was invented at Stanford in the 60s and got renamed design thinking about a dozen years ago when it got hot. So we've been around for over 50 years. We've been hot for about 12.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Wow. And so for those, if people look at the book, you mentioned 4 ways of design thinking. Can you go over those 4 things?
4 kinds of thinking.
Yeah.
So one of the best ways to understand what design thinking is that it's different from other ways of thinking. So engineers think a certain way, called engineering thinking. Engineering thinking is a problem-solving approach to what are called tame problems, well-defined problems about which I know all the success criteria are stable. The controlling equations and conditions are well understood, and you can solve really, really big, hard, but tame problems using engineering. You can build bridges, you can go to the moon. Eventually, we'll solve cold fusion. Cold fusion is a tame problem.
Yeah.
A really, really hard, tame problem we haven't solved yet, but it's tame. Now, like raising a junior hire, that's a really wicked problem. Inventing a city, that's a wicked problem. Wicked problems are problems that have flexible criteria. They keep changing. You won't know success until you find it. Once you find it, you can't repeat it again because the solution's totally unique. Once I get Tommy invented, that doesn't help invent Dave at all.
Yep.
So those are wicked problems. So engineers solve tame problems. Designers solve wicked problems. Along the way, you got business people. They think in optimization. So business people optimize things. You're never right in business. You're never done in business, but you can get better.
Got it.
So let's get really good at being a little bit better, in fact, measurably better, quantitatively better, return on asset, customer satisfaction, customer delight, supply chain optimization better.
Yeah.
So business people are really good at that better thing, and preferably quantified better.
Yeah.
Then you've got researchers who are really good at the analytic thing, because we're going to invent new knowledge by analyzing it in a certain way. So there's engineering thinking, there's optimization thinking, there's analytic thinking. Those are wonderful, but they don't solve the human problem. And the human problem is the wicked problem of what do I do with my life, and a lot of other things too. You have to develop by inventing. You have to try it.
Got it.
And so let's have a lot of really creative ideas so we don't leave anything behind unnecessarily, and then take the better of those ideas and try them. So we prototype our way to the future, and we iterate that prototype and iterate that prototype and iterate that prototype until we create the discovery of the answer. You can't analytically find the answer like it's sitting there in an equation. It's said, probably anecdotally, we don't know that this is true, but it's exactly the kind of thing that he would say. It's reported that Henry Ford, when asked, said, "Look, if I gave people what they were asking me for, I give them a faster horse."
Yeah.
We didn't know what the car was.
Yeah.
Alan Kay, many, many years ago, a fellow from Xerox, said the best way to forecast the future is to invent it. You have to see it to believe it, and you have to build it to believe it. And so what we do in design is we're not quite sure what it is, but maybe it's something like this.
Yeah.
And what would users really want? So like I had 120 mouse prototypes. What is a computer mouse that you will actually like, and how does it work? We don't know. We have no idea how this graphic-based electromechanical, your hand is moving, the cartoons are emulating, and you're making decisions.
Got it.
How the heck does that work? We have no idea. We just go try it. We have to learn our way into it. So human life is learned by doing. So design thinking is a way to learn by doing our way into a future that makes sense.
Yep. How about 4 steps?
Okay, Well, the 5 steps.
Or 5 steps.
The 5 steps of design thinking are: empathy, definition, ideation, prototype, and test.
Got it.
So we start with empathy. So deeply understand the situation by listening, and this again is a profoundly Christian idea, is to listen to everyone, including the voice of the oppressed. Right?
Yeah.
So Jesus' preferred constituency, the widow, the poor, the orphan, the prisoner, and the sick, the people who have no power, have no voice. Right? Christianity starts with hear from them, value them the way God does. God hears everybody. Well, a good designer hears everybody. A good designer takes a godly point of view and sees things. I need to fully understand the situation before we begin designing, because I need to hear the human experience. Then we go to, now that I've heard, now I can define my point of view. What is my point of view about this problem? What problem am I working on? We problem find before we problem solve. Then we problem define. And then we start having a bunch of ideas. And we're really good. We're known for ideas and post-it notes and brainstorming and all that. We can get into that, And let's have lots of ideas in order to have the best solution, right? No, we have lots of ideas to have rich prototyping experiences, which we iterate over and over again in order to then experience our way to the best possible solution.
Got it.
So it's very empirical, just like Jesus. I mean, God. Think about it. As Christians, God says, how can I help them to really get who I am and how I want them to be? Oh, I know. I'll put skin on. We believe that the full expression of the reality of God is understood through a God that both knew we needed and then gave us an embodiment. That we believe ourselves to be imago Dei, an image of God bearing spiritual creatures. That we are embodied intelligences living in a good world. And God thinks the best way to understand that is through the profound empathy of embodying himself, including all the constraint and the suppression and the leaving behind. Jesus, who did not hold equality with God a thing to be grasped. Now, Colossians 3 said, the fullness of God is pleased to dwell in Jesus. So we have this great paradox that the fullness of God is pleased to dwell in Jesus. Look, we go, how in the world could all of God fit into Jesus? Not only does it fit, it's pleased to fit. The fullness of God is pleased to dwell in Jesus. It's perfectly comfortable and at home there, which makes no sense at all. And that fullness does not even hold equality with God, which he had, a thing to be grasped. Living out the fullness of who I am as a person is not necessary. I will argue, we're on a different point here, that the fun thing, as we design our lives, that design includes leaving a tremendous amount behind. We, like Jesus, when the scriptures say to complete and continue the sufferings of Christ, part of his suffering was incompleteness of expression. He was a complete person, not fully expressed. All of us are not fully expressed.
Got it. And you look at, let's say, for the journey of John chapter 3, John chapter 4 with the Samaritan woman, and then later on with the Gentile and the Indian at the pool, all of them had to realize who they were and what they had to leave behind.
And
for
where are you now?
Jesus.
It's like the Samaritan woman. It's really, now what? I mean, the question God is asking is not, oh, what about back there? Let's go rehash regret.
Correct.
That's not what God is doing. God is doing, now what? See, God, like design thinking, has a deep, and I would even argue brutal, commitment to reality. That God accepts God's decision to create the world. God accepts God's decision to give us autonomy and agency. And God accepts that things are the way they are. God is not stomping around heaven in his slippers going, oh no, Tommy. It's not, it shouldn't have been Dave, on Friday. It should have been Susie on Tuesday. What were you thinking? I mean, that's all regret. That's all retrograde. It's just like, okay, now what?
Correct. Hey, two last questions. I actually was looking at a quote that you made. You said every single human being has more lives in them than they can live in one lifetime.
Specifically, we each contain more aliveness, more life, than one lifetime will permit us to express. In other words, when you finally get to your deathbed, if you're still got your wits and you're paying attention and you've been living into the invitation of the Holy Spirit, I will argue those people don't go, well, thank God, if this would 5 minutes more, it's like stick a fork in it. I'm done. I'm out of here. Like that's it. I'm like, can we just go now? No. It's the intrinsic gift of God that we are absolutely bigger than a lifetime.
Yeah.
We're all going to leave a whole bunch of possibilities untouched.
Got it. Interesting.
You got to get comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Are you going to be fulfilled? No.
Yeah.
Are you going to get it all done? No.
Interesting.
Can you do everything God is asking of you? Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. A lot of times you not only work with a lot of marketplace leaders, you also work with a lot of pastors as well too. This whole idea of design thinking, what is a phrase, what is a word of advice you would give to pastors as they shepherd the people in their church on how do you help them process that?
Okay. I would say to pastors, we're design thinking profoundly agrees with God's way of doing things. Mm-hmm. It actually just reflects God's way of doing things, because design thinking is called human-centered design because a bunch of people got together in the early days of the human potential movement in the 60s and said, okay, how do human beings work? How do human beings think? How do human beings collaborate? How do they have ideas? How does their brain work? What's the neuroscience of ideation? And then how can you make stuff that will work for people when they use it?
Yeah.
So it's human, 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 human. And being fully human is what God is asking us to do. And so the way God works with human beings is that we live into stuff. And so pastors are tempted to become authoritarian, and I'm supposed to know the stuff you don't know, and to declare from the front of the room, here's what God has for your life, and here's where we should go as a church, and follow me. So that's kind of a natural inclination of leadership. And particularly if it's a leadership of a special category, like I'm uniquely spiritual. I spent all this time learning all this spirituality stuff. You haven't had time to work on it because you're in the insurance business. But I'm like a full-time God guy. I get it and you don't. It's an incredibly understandable natural inclination. It just happens to be dead wrong. The way Jesus does things is he teaches into the moment of what's teachable, and then he gives somebody something to do. So go to this town and talk to these people, see how it goes. Come back and talk to me. So let's go try this stuff. And what are we doing? We're doing it sensitive to the moment. So I'm sitting around a table in this in these people's house, and we're talking about what's on their mind.
Yeah.
Not like, here's what you need to know. Jesus never goes, here's what you need to know. He says, so consider, the lilies. What do you see around you? You guys are all worried about stuff. Let's talk about this worry you've got. So design thinking starts with empathy. We meet people where they are, not where they should be. Jesus does not should on people. Design does not should on people. We reel on people. So I would say to pastors, look, start with where people are. Teach what's teachable in the moment. And then go live into it and do something. Embody it, incarnate it.
Got it. Yeah.
Iterate it. Do it again. Iterate it. Do it again. It's called the walk of faith. So design thinking so when I teach discernment, I do a mashup of design thinking and Christian spirituality, and the 4 steps of living forward into this life, I will argue, are, number 1, walk in the way expectantly. Believe that God is prevenient, imminent, and communicative, and something's going on. Listen for longing. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Psalm 37, 3 and 4. And what that does not mean, if you're a good Christian, you get the cookie. The prosperity gospel stuff. Prosperity gospel people love that verse. If you delight yourself in the Lord, you get what you want. Yeah. No, you get wants. What God forms in you is desire that aligns with who God's made you to be.
Yeah.
God doesn't give you the object of your desire. God's greatest gift to you is desire, longing. So if I'm walking in the way expectantly and living faithfully, then what's going to happen is God will work collaboratively. My spirit and the Holy Spirit collaborate that the longings in me that I begin to validate through the experimentation process, then cultivate the sacred imagination, imagine together with God, co-create with God what might be, and then lean into the leading. Don't jump out of the airplane and go start into China right away. Go start taking this one step at a time, which is prototyping, right? So in design thinking, The 4 steps are: get curious, talk to people, try stuff, and tell your story. When I teach this as Christian discernment, it's walk in the way expectantly, listen for longing, cultivate the sacred imagination, lean into the leading, and continue in that, and you'll find yourself on the shady side of a decision every now and then.
Yeah. Thank you, Dave.
You're very welcome.
Appreciate talking with you.
Fun to be here. Good to be with you, Chicago.